Hi guys, it's Brent Sands here from Motion Raceworks, and today we're going to be installing a TBM kit on the back of the 6th Gen Camaro. And today we're going to be using the Blue Mule for the install. So the Blue Mule has already had TBM brakes on it before, so this is going to be a little bit different, but I'll try to cover everything. Right here is the kit that will come to you from TBM. You're going to get a rotor. We're using our used one, rotor hardware pack. I have a F3 caliper here for demo. The F3 caliper is already installed on the car, the rotor hub, and the bracket for the caliper. Some of the tools you're going to need is a 15mm socket and ratchet. You may need a swivel for some tight areas. You need a 15/16 Allen and a 5/32 Allen, an extension, a 32mm socket, and an AirCat 1150 or something equivalent to get the axle nut off. Let's get started. So right here we have a 6th Gen Camaro rear knuckle that we got from the scrapyard, and this is going to be our demonstration piece because most of these pieces are already removed from the Blue Mule. The first thing you're going to want to do is take your impact and 32mm socket and remove the axle nut. This is pretty tight, so an impact works really well. If you don't have an impact, get a giant breaker bar and have a buddy hold the brakes so you don't damage your transmission or damage the park. Once you have that removed, tap on the axle right on the end here with a dead blow and make sure that these splines are free from the wheel hub. The next thing you're going to want to do is come on around to the back side and remove these 3 bolts that hold the bearing hub assembly into the knuckle. And those are use a 15mm socket. These can be tricky to get to, but it is doable. And once you have this removed, these bolts removed, you can tap on this with a dead blow, get it to rock sideways, and get the wheel bearing off. Once the wheel bearing and hub assembly come off, then you can remove the factory parking brake or emergency brake, and we will not be reusing this emergency brake for this install. Once you have all this removed, there is no other modifications you need to do to this knuckle for the TBM brake kit. Everything else is just bolt on, no cutting or anything needed. And once you have this done, we can get to the assembly. All right, now it's time to start assembling our brake kit. So you're going to take your rotor hat. Right now I just have 1/2 of the kit laid out for us because of lack of table space, but take your kit, take your rotor, make sure that the dished end is facing up and set that onto the hat. You're going to take this supplied hardware and you're going to want to use Loctite on these. Right now we're just mocking this up, so we're not going to use any Loctite, but all right, now our hat and rotor assembly are ready to go. In the hardware kit, you can see we have new bolts to hold your bearing hub assembly on. These are caliper mounting bolts. These are the washers and lock nuts for the caliper mounting bolts. And these are shims to shim the caliper so we can center it from side to side on around the rotor. There's 2 different sizes. There's 10 thousandths and 30 thousandths thickness, and we'll get to those a little bit later. We're gonna need 2 caliper mounting bolts, 2 washer, a lock nut, washer, lock nut, washer. See these for later. All right, so now let's go to the car. All right, now we're here on the Blue Mule. We're going to be installing our brake caliper bracket. The kit comes with these bolts in it, and these are actually for the 5th Gen. For the 6th Gen Camaro, you can reuse your factory hardware. So we're going to stick those in through the back side of the knuckle. And this car has aftermarket axles in it, so they are a little bit bigger. If you have factory axles, this will be much easier. Get that in. Then we'll take our caliper bracket. Make sure these bosses are facing the inside of the car, and we'll set it on like that. Your stock caliper is going to go here. The new TBM caliper is going to go up here. Then we're going to take our bearing assembly, get it started onto the axle, start the hub, clock it so you can get the bolts in, and push it together. And then start all your hardware. You may need to push in on the axle with your thumb to get more clearance in the back. Now that these are all finger tight, we'll torque them down. All right, now that everything's tight on the bearing hub, we can throw our rotor and hat on. As long as, just like that. Then we can take our caliper. Ours has already been bled and loaded, so this will be a little bit different than yours, but slip that on over the back. And then we'll take our 3/8 socket head bolts, go through the caliper into the bracket, get them started. I'm started. All right, so once we have the caliper snugged up, we're gonna wanna tighten up our rotor with some washers or spacers or whatever you can find up against the bearing flange so we can check our center to center distance, our spacing on our caliper. So we'll just throw a couple lug nuts on and make sure it's nice and flat against there. And what we want to do is make sure that the rotor is in the center of the caliper, which it looks pretty close. You can use feeler gauges in between your new pads to check the spacing from side to side. This just keeps the pistons even and keeps them from binding. If you do find that the caliper is a little bit proud of where it should be, you can use some of those spacers that come with the kit and shim between the caliper bracket and the caliper to kind of bring the caliper back in. Again, those are in 10 thou and 30 thou increments. But this one seems to look really close, so that's it. All right, once you have your caliper installed, everything's shimmed correctly, it's time to now install the axle nut. So screw this in, and you can use an impact to tighten it. There is a torque spec for this, you can look up. If you are not using an impact and using a torque wrench or a breaker bar, you want to make sure your brakes are bled. Have a buddy sit in the car, hold the brakes, because this will put a lot of strain on your parking paw when you're trying to tighten this, and tighten this up. And once you have that tightened, you can put your wheel back on and you're ready to rip. This has been the 6th gen brake install on the Blue Mule. Hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, you can always email our sales guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.